Do you believe that demonic possession is real? Do you believe that people can actually become possessed? Do you believe that exorcisms really do work? Well, I'm going to tell you about an actual possession case in which an exorcism was done and worked on this next episode of Peculiar Finds for Curious Minds. And I'm Jennifer Kennedy. Don't forget to check out my website, peculiartalk.com, where you'll find my psychic services that I offer, including psychic readings with tarot readings, oracle readings, and rune readings, as well as psychic services for the police, paranormal teams, and more. You can also find every episode on the website, and you can subscribe to it on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, Podomatic, and YouTube. Welcome, and sorry about the absence for the past 2 weeks. Life's been pretty hectic, but I'm back, and this week I'm going to tell you all about the possession of Clara Germana Cele. Clara Germana Cele was an orphan 16-year-old Bantu child. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. It's either Bantu or Bantu, meaning she was of African descent. She was a Christian at St. Michael's Mission in Nepal's South Africa. She was baptized at the mission as an infant, and she was raised there as an orphan. She's also known as Germana, but I'm going to refer to her as Clara. It's said that she had sold her soul to the devil. She claimed to have confessed this to Father Horner Erasmus. She became possessed in 1906. So let's just delve right into this. First, I'm going to tell you about the possession itself. This is one of the first modern possession cases that a large group of people actually witnessed. Before Clara became possessed, she had gone to a confession where she actually told the priest that she wanted to make a pact with the devil. The priest didn't really take her seriously, and life went on as usual. But she later went back to Father Erasmus and told him that the deal was done, that she had made a pact with the devil. But even then, after that, the priests there at the mission still didn't listen to her or heed her warnings. And soon after that, she started displaying signs of possession. On the date of her 16th birthday in June, that's when it all started. She became confused and uncomfortable in her usual surroundings there in the mission where she was usually comfortable. She started to become confused and uncomfortable, and then her behavior started to become erratic. That night, while she was in bed, she cried out for help, and 2 nuns came in to help her. When the 2 nuns went into her bedroom, she exclaimed to them, "Get the priest. I have to confess something. Get him quickly. I'm afraid Satan will kill me before I have a chance to confess." That's an actual quote of what she said to the nuns. So the nuns went and they got Father Erasmus, and he came in and he tended to her. And this is when she told him that she had made a pact with the devil. Again, she tells them for the second time that she made this pact. And she told him that now she was possessed. She said, quote, "I am lost. I have confessed and taken communion under false pretenses. Satan is calling me." Well, Father Erasmus thought that she was just a young teen and her imagination was just running wild, and he just completely disregarded her claims that she was possessed. So he didn't really do anything about it. Life went on. Everything was kind of normal. And then 6 weeks later, on August 20th, that's when things really broke loose. That's when the possession really started to show. On that night, 2 nuns were drawn to Clara's room when they heard a whole bunch of screaming and commotion coming from it. When they went into her room, they found her curled up on her bed with her clothes all torn up and shredded, and the bed frame was broken. They go in and they're like, what's going on? What's going on? And she told them that she had thrown away all of her crosses and rosaries and that had left her vulnerable. Well, when the nuns went in and they tried to help her, she began tearing her whole room apart, completely freaking out, running around her room, tearing it up, and screaming at an entity that only she could see. In the book Demonic Possession, Extraordinary True Life Experiences by C. Torrington, he alleges that Clara felt like she was cheated out of something by the demon who possessed her, and she was screaming this at the entity. Quote, "You have betrayed me. You have promised me days of glory, but now you torture me." So he says basically that she made this pact with the devil, and then she becomes possessed, and she starts screaming at this demon that, hey, you betrayed me, you promised me glory, and you didn't give it to me, you're torturing me now. So she's running around the room, the nuns are watching her, screaming and tearing things up at this entity, this demon. Well, after that happened, it's a big commotion, it disturbs everybody in the mission. Mother Superior ordered 2 nuns and 3 other older girls to stay up and watch Clara for the rest of the night. Mother Superior believed that it was just Clara's imagination and a cry for attention. Nobody believed this girl. She tells 2 priests that she's going to make a pact with the devil. They both ignore her. Then she tells a priest, hey, I already made the pact with the devil. He thinks nothing of it. Poo-poo away the idea. Then she tells the same priest, I'm possessed. I made that deal and now I'm possessed. And he still ignores her. Now she's up freaking out in the middle of the night, 6 weeks later, yelling and screaming at this demon that he cheated her. And they still think she's doing this for attention. So they're all there watching over Clara that night, and they don't go to sleep. They just kind of sit around. Things were pretty calm at first. Clara, the nuns, and the other girls were all laughing and having conversation. It was pretty normal. But then the topic of religion came up, and Clara started asking the nuns about their devotion to God. And that's when things became violent, and that's when things really kicked off and started raising red flags for people. Clara picked up the nuns and tossed them across the room, tossed them around the room repeatedly with inhuman strength. I mean, we're talking about a small 16-year-old girl. And then she beat them, tore off their clothes, and when I say beat them, I mean she beat them and she left them barely conscious. While she's beating the nuns and throwing them around the room, the 3 other girls that were in there made no attempts to intervene. They just kind of stood back on the side, completely baffled, watching it all happen. It's like they froze. They didn't even want to try and intervene. They're watching this girl pick up these nuns without a problem, and we're not talking about picking and just kind of chucking somebody a foot. She threw these nuns across the room. So these girls are witnessing it. They don't do anything. But after this incident, that's when the mission and the priests and everybody woke up and were like, okay, we need to really start treating this like a possible possession case. After this is when they began to record everything that was going on in writing. They recorded all accounts of Clara's actions in the whole case, and they put her through various tests to see if it was a real possession, or if she was just attention seeking, or if it was all just a hoax. So the red flags went up, and they start to think, okay, maybe there's something to this. But they still, after all of this other stuff that, she's telling them straight up, look, I'm going to do this. This is what happened and so on. I'm going to make a pact with the devil and I'm possessed. And they still think it's just a cry for attention. So they put her through a bunch of tests. And one of those tests was throwing holy water on her. Well, they discovered that when they threw holy water on her, her skin would burn. Like actual burns would show up on her skin. Her skin would bubble and burn. Even when she wasn't in an obvious state of possession, or what she claimed to be possession. The holy water, when it was tossed on her, would also bring her out of a possessed state. That's when they started really taking it seriously. So what other things happened that made them believe, okay, this girl is possessed? There is something definitely wrong here. Well, one of the pretty bizarre things was that fire would mysteriously appear sometimes in her presence, in Clara's presence. We're not talking about just a little flame. Like, fire just would ignite out of nowhere when she was around. One incident that they recorded was in the kitchen. Fire just erupted by her. A big, huge fire. Big enough that caused everybody in the kitchen to run out of the kitchen so that they didn't burn. And then the fire would just go out. Another incident was in her bedroom. The fire was in the middle of her bed while she was on her bed. And it burned her sheets. It burned the bed. But Clara and her clothes were unaffected by the fire. She wasn't even affected. She's right there, and the fire is right there in front of her, and it didn't even faze her. This fire just whoosh appeared and started burning out of thin air. This apparently happened repeatedly, but these are the two main incidences, larger incidences that were recorded, but it happened more often than that. She also suddenly began to speak many languages that she had never been exposed to. She had never even heard them spoken before. Never heard them, never spoke them, never studied them. She just magically began to speak fluently French, Polish, German, and other European languages. And this was witnessed by the nuns and other people there at the mission. Not just, one or two, not just a priest. It was witnessed by a lot of people. She demonstrated clairvoyance, where she could read people's minds. She revealed intimate secrets of people who she had never even met. There was a man there at the mission who mocked her, was making fun of her because of all her erratic behavior. Well, he was in there mocking her, and she revealed his ungodly exploits, when they happened, and who they happened with. So naturally, he ran off, didn't go around her anymore. The congregation would regularly go in and gather around her to pray for her and help her, but she began to reveal their impure thoughts, who those thoughts were about, what they were about, and it freaked people out. So they stopped going around her to help her, which in the case of demonic possession, that's the whole point, to try and isolate you. So she would just know people's deepest, darkest secrets. Their we are talking about a mission. They were Christian. Their impure, unchristian thoughts, and she would spew it all out. When she started showing clairvoyance, this was soon after Father Erasmus had recently taken a trip to Rome. And when he came back, she was displaying this clairvoyance ability. And she described details about his trip, including where he had gone in Rome, who he had met there, who he spoke to, things he had done when he was there. And she gave details that even he had a hard time remembering. She knew every little thing about his trip as though she was right there with him. Described it in great detail. She also knew whenever a priest or a nun had a crucifix or rosary hidden when they would come into her room, if they would try and hide it from her to try and protect themselves, she knew it. She would become fearful, and she would tell them that they had a crucifix or a rosary and that it was hidden. Hey, I know you got that crucifix behind your back, get rid of it. A young priest that Father Erasmus had met in Rome came there and tried to exorcise Clara. That was a big mistake. Because of her erratic, crazy behavior, he got frustrated and he slapped her. But when he slapped her, she grabbed his stole, ripped it up in shreds, and then choked him, like with her hands, choked him. And then she let go. She scrambled into the corner of the room and was cowering in it and cried, while the injured priest got up and fled. He ran off and he never came back. After this incident, the people in the mission put Clara in a private room of her own, far away from all the other girls' rooms in the mission, because they didn't want anything to happen to these girls. They saw the violence and her attempts to choke the priest. They didn't want to put anybody else in danger, so they moved her in a private room far away from everyone else. After she was moved to this private room, everybody in the mission started to hear loud thuds that sounded like thunder ringing through the whole building. They could never figure out where they were coming from. They just heard these constant, loud, thunderous thuds. Clara's door was repeatedly struck from the outside while she was inside in bed, and a monk checked her door to try and figure out what was going on, how it was being, where these sounds was coming from, how it was being struck, and found nothing and no one there. They were inside her room. She was in bed, and they would hear something banging the door from the outside. So the monk went out and checked, and there was nothing there. All the other doors in the mission began to make loud thud sounds as well. At one point, a priest walked up and down the hallways to look for what was causing the thud sounds with a gun. He walked down the hallways brandishing a gun because, he didn't know what was making the sounds and trying to protect himself. Clara laughed at him and said, quote, "The one who is inside me is only taking delight and pleasure in all of this." Oh, and reports also say that she had an aversion to blessed objects and all forms of religious iconography. But in the book A History of Exorcism in Catholic Christianity by Francis Young, he says that might not be entirely true because she went to confession and received Holy Communion during the exorcism. But then again, she did that way back in the beginning when she first confessed to the priest that, hey, I made a deal with the devil. And then later on, she told the priest, hey, I did false confession and communion. But the reports say that she had a severe aversion to all holy objects, blessed objects, crucifixes, rosaries, any kind of holy objects. And she herself even said she got rid of all of her crosses and rosaries. They say that she made inhuman guttural noises and screams as well, that they sounded like a beast, and that her language became largely expletive. She cussed and used other foul language a lot. One nun described it as, quote, "No animal had ever made such sounds, neither the lions of East Africa nor the angry bulls. At times it sounded like a veritable herd of wild beasts orchestrated by Satan had formed a hellish choir." But the signs of her possession didn't stop there. She began taking on physical changes as well. And these physical changes seemed humanly impossible, but they were witnessed by many people in the mission. They say that at times her neck would extend so far out that the pressure produced large lumps under her skin, and that these lumps would then move around under her skin and then shrink and disappear. So her neck is stretching out real long, and you've got these weird lumps like giant bugs or something crawling under her skin. The reports also say that she would sometimes fall to the floor limp, roll onto her stomach, and slither around the floor like a snake. Witnesses to this said that the type of slither movement she made when she did this was impossible for a human skeleton to make. The type of movements and the slithering back and forth movement, that there's no way a human skeleton can bend and move in the way that she did. When she did this snake slithering thing, she would also flick out her tongue and strike out like a snake at the same time while she's slithering on the floor. And at one of those times, a nun knelt down beside her in prayer to try and help her, and she struck out like a snake and bit the nun's arm and left puncture wounds that looked like a snake bite. So they've got all this stuff going on, and now they're convinced, all right, this girl's definitely possessed, and they're probably regretting not paying attention to her in the first place, because had they paid attention, they probably could have avoided all this craziness and the nuns being beaten and everything. So they go ahead and they order an exorcism, and it was performed by 2 Roman Catholic priests. One of them was Reverend Mansuetti, who was the director of the St. Michael's mission there, and Reverend Erasmus, the one that she confessed to in the first place. The exorcism began on September 10th, 1906, in the morning, and it lasted until noon when they broke for lunch, and then they came back and continued the exorcism at 3 o'clock, and it continued well into the night. They finally broke to rest and began again the next morning at 8 a.m. The exorcism carried on basically for 2 days. It was performed in front of 170 people. All of these people witnessed the strange possession behavior, not just during the exorcisms. These are people from around the mission. They had been witnessing all the crazy things that she was doing up until now, crazy inhuman things. And now all these 170 people are witnessing the exorcism. When the exorcism first started, Clara instantly grabbed the Bible out of one of the priest's hands and tossed it onto the floor, then grabbed his stole and tried to strangle him with it. This was just in the very beginning. As soon as they started the exorcism, she snapped. All 170 people, plus the priests, witnessed and reported that throughout the entire exorcism, throughout the 2 days, multiple times she would levitate 3, 4, and even 5 feet off the bed, both vertically and horizontally. There's reports that during the exorcism at one point her body lost all rigidity and became, quote, rubbery like a serpent. Some reports even say that she actually turned into a snake. Now, I know that sounds kind of crazy, but then again, before the exorcism, we have all these reports saying that she would drop to the floor and slither like a snake and strike out like a snake, and she bit the nun's arm and left the snake bite. So maybe that's why they're saying she turned into a snake. They probably don't mean like physically, boom, she's a snake, but that's probably what they were describing. She continued throughout the exorcism to make these deep guttural noises. They called them animal type noises. And she would speak to people who were not there. At one point during the exorcism, she smashed her bed to pieces and ripped her clothes apart. Throughout the whole exorcism, they repeatedly threw holy water on her. Eventually, towards the end, they just became more aggressive with it, throwing more and more holy water on her, till essentially she was completely doused here at the end of the exorcism. Completely doused in holy water, soaking wet in it, until the demon basically agreed to leave her body, or the demon just gave up. And when it did, she levitated one last time, they say to about 5 or 6 feet above her bed, and then she just instantly dropped down and slammed down onto her bed. And then that was the end of the exorcism. The demon had left, and the exorcism is said to have been successful. She was fine. And again, this was in September when they ordered the exorcism. And she was fine until January of 1907, 4 months later, where again, she made a second deal with Satan and became possessed again. Okay, you didn't learn the first time. You even got angry at the demon and at the devil and sat and yelled at it and argued with it that you got cheated, that it cheated and promised you glory and was just torturing you. And you didn't learn your lesson. You decided to make a second deal. What did he say? Hey, I know I screwed you over last time, but I'm going to do you right this time. Give me another chance. After all of that, and you're going to do it again. So yeah, she made a second deal with Satan in January 1907, became possessed again, and had to have another exorcism. And that one was also successful. Reports say that at that second exorcism, that when it was done, when the demon left, the room that they were in was completely filled with a monstrously foul odor. Afterwards, after both possessions, and she returned to normal, she was fine. We're talking about later on down the road. Some people claim that it was mental illness, but she lived out the remainder of her life normally. No mental illness, no issues, never had any of these problems again, never freaked out, never acted like a snake. None of this ever happened again. She was perfectly fine. She was actually really embarrassed by how she acted during the exorcisms, and she tried to live a humble life from here on out. But the people in the mission, when all these people are speaking up saying, oh, she was probably just mentally ill, The people in the mission who witnessed everything said no, she was not mentally ill. They explained that had it been a mental illness, it would have presented itself again throughout the rest of her life. It would have. That's how mental illness works. It doesn't just boom, go away. You're only mentally ill for a little bit. The people in the mission stand up and stand by their story that she was indeed possessed. But what's strange, after that second exorcism, while she never showed signs of possession again, she did, oddly, die in 1912, when she was only 22 years old, of heart failure. Very unusual. Highly unusual. Heart failure at 22 years old. Only 5 years after her second possession. Now, if you go and you look up on the internet or read up on the internet about this case, there is a picture that is widely used all across the internet in the videos and articles. You can even Google her name and this picture will come up of a young Caucasian girl who's strapped to a bed and looks like she's being exorcised and possessed. And it's labeled that this is Clara Germana Cele, but it's not. Clara was Bantu African, and it is reported that she was a black female. I have looked and looked to try and find a picture of her, but I wasn't able to find one. I don't think that there is one, at least not available on the internet. I'm sure somebody somewhere has one, maybe in the records that the nuns kept. They probably have pictures of her there at the mission, but there's not one readily available on the internet. And anytime you want to look her up and you find pictures, they're not her. You see dozens of pictures of white girls, and this girl was not white. This was a South African Bantu girl back in 1906. That's it for this week. Check back next week. I'm going to do an episode about energy vortexes around the world. Thanks for listening.